Before we begin, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you enjoy powerful real-life comeback stories. Now, let me tell you the story of a man who once slept on the streets with nothing and returned years later as a self-made millionaire just to prove everyone who doubted him wrong. 3 years ago, he was sleeping on a cold sidewalk with nothing but a torn backpack and a few coins in his pocket. People passed by him every day, pretending he didn't exist. Some laughed. Some whispered that he was just another failure who ruined his own life. One man even told him straight to his face, "You'll never be anything more than this." But what they didn't know was that the quiet homeless man sitting on that sidewalk was secretly planning the comeback of his life. And today, the same people who once ignored him now watch in shock as the man they mocked returns to the city, a self-made millionaire. And he didn't do it for fame. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it for one simple reason: to prove them wrong. The rain started falling just after midnight. On a quiet street corner, a man sat alone under a flickering streetlight, clutching a worn-out backpack. His jacket was thin, barely enough to keep the cold away. His name was Daniel Carter, and this was where he slept now. Just a few months earlier, Daniel's life looked completely different. He had a stable job, a small apartment, and plans for a future that seemed perfectly normal. Nothing extravagant, nothing glamorous, but it was enough. Until everything collapsed faster than he ever imagined. It started with a sudden round of layoffs at the company where he worked. One meeting, one envelope. Just like that, his job was gone. At first, Daniel believed it was only temporary. He told himself he'd find something new within weeks. But weeks turned into months. His savings slowly disappeared. Rent became impossible to pay. And eventually, the landlord knocked on his door with a final notice. The day Daniel was forced to leave his apartment, he carried everything he owned in a single backpack. Friends stopped answering his calls. Family members who once supported him now kept their distance, quietly believing he had failed in life. And so that night, sitting alone under the cold streetlight, Daniel Carter realized something painful. He had officially become invisible. Just another homeless man people passed every day without a second glance. But what none of them knew was that Daniel still had one thing left: an idea. An idea that one day would completely change his life. Morning came with the sound of traffic and distant car horns. Daniel Carter slowly opened his eyes, the cold pavement beneath him reminding him that this was no longer temporary. This was his reality now. He folded the thin piece of cardboard he used as a bed and placed it back into his backpack. Around him, people rushed to work, holding coffee cups and checking their phones. No one looked at him. To them, Daniel was just another homeless man on the street. Hungry and exhausted, he walked several blocks to a small convenience store. The smell of fresh coffee and warm sandwiches filled the air as customers stepped in and out. Daniel hesitated at the door. He hadn't eaten a proper meal in almost 2 days. Swallowing his pride, he stepped inside and quietly approached the counter. "Excuse me," he said softly to the cashier. "Do you have any leftover food? Anything that might be thrown away?" The cashier barely looked up. Before she could answer, a man standing nearby laughed under his breath. Daniel recognized him instantly. It was Mark, a former co-worker from the company that had laid him off. Mark looked Daniel up and down, his wrinkled clothes, tired eyes, and worn-out backpack, and shook his head with a smirk. "Daniel? Wow, I almost didn't recognize you," Mark said loud enough for others in the store to hear. A few customers turned their heads. "This is what happened to you? Man, I guess some people just weren't meant to succeed." The words hit harder than Daniel expected. For a moment, he felt every pair of eyes in the store staring at him. But Daniel said nothing. He simply lowered his gaze, turned around, and walked out of the store. Behind him, Mark's quiet chuckle followed him out the door. Standing outside under the morning sun, Daniel tightened his grip on his backpack. That moment hurt more than losing his job, because now he knew the truth. People didn't just see him as someone who was struggling. They saw him as someone who had already lost. But what they didn't realize was that Daniel Carter wasn't finished yet. By the afternoon, the city had grown louder. Daniel sat on a worn wooden bench near a busy bus stop, watching people rush past him like he didn't exist. Office workers in suits, students with headphones, delivery drivers moving quickly from one stop to another. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go. Everyone except him. His stomach growled, reminding him he still hadn't eaten. But hunger wasn't the only thing on his mind anymore. Something else had started to bother him. Over the past few days, Daniel had been quietly observing the same thing again and again. Every morning, people rushed out of coffee shops carrying drinks and breakfast sandwiches. But by afternoon, trash bins around the area were overflowing with untouched food. Half sandwiches, full pastries, entire meals still inside their packaging. Perfectly good food thrown away. Daniel leaned forward, watching a cafe employee walk outside with a large trash bag. When the bag was dropped into the bin, a few unopened containers slid out. Food that someone could have eaten. Food that people like him desperately needed. And suddenly, a strange thought crossed his mind. What if this wasn't just waste? What if this was an opportunity? Daniel's heart began to beat faster. Cities threw away millions of dollars worth of food every single day. Restaurants didn't want the hassle of dealing with leftovers, and people who needed food had no easy way to access it. But what if there was a system? A way for restaurants to quickly list extra food before closing, and for nearby people to buy it cheaply instead of letting it go to waste. Daniel stared at the busy street, his mind racing faster than it had in months. An app, a simple platform connecting restaurants with surplus food to people nearby who could buy it at a huge discount. Restaurants would earn extra money, customers would get cheap meals, and less food would be wasted. For the first time in a long time, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in months: hope. But then, reality hit him just as quickly. He had no money, no computer, no home, just a backpack and an idea. And yet, sitting there on that quiet bench, Daniel Carter made a silent promise to himself. No matter how impossible it seemed, he was going to find a way to make that idea real. The idea wouldn't leave Daniel's mind. For the next few days, it followed him everywhere. While he sat at bus stops, while he walked through crowded streets, even when he tried to sleep on cold sidewalks at night. The idea kept growing. But ideas alone didn't change lives. Action did. One morning, Daniel walked into a public library a few blocks away. The warm air inside felt almost unreal compared to the cold streets outside. He hadn't been inside a library in years. Trying not to draw attention, Daniel sat down at one of the public computers. The screen flickered to life as he slowly placed his backpack on the floor beside him. This was the first step. He didn't know how to build an app. He didn't know how to start a company. But he knew one thing. If other people could figure it out, so could he. Hour after hour, Daniel watched free tutorials online. He read articles about startups, food waste, and mobile apps. Most of the terms confused him at first, but he kept going. Every day he returned to the same computer in the library. Every day he filled pages of a small notebook he had found in a recycling bin. Sketches of screens, notes about features, ideas about how restaurants could list their extra food before closing. Slowly, the impossible idea started turning into a real plan. But not everyone believed in it. One afternoon, while Daniel was sitting outside the library writing in his notebook, a passerby glanced at the pages and laughed. "Planning to become the next tech billionaire?" the man joked. Daniel didn't respond. He simply kept writing. Because for the first time since losing everything, he wasn't thinking about survival anymore. He was thinking about the future. Still, there was one massive problem standing in his way. Ideas and plans were useless without someone who could actually build the technology. And Daniel had no money to hire anyone, which meant the next step in his journey would be the hardest one yet. He needed someone to believe in a homeless man with nothing except an idea that could change everything. Daniel knew one thing for sure. If his idea was ever going to become real, he needed someone who understood technology, someone who could build the app. But finding that person turned out to be far harder than he imagined. For the next several days, Daniel walked across different parts of the city, carrying his worn notebook everywhere he went. Whenever he saw someone working on a laptop in cafes or shared workspaces, he gathered the courage to approach them. "Excuse me," he would say carefully. "Can I show you an idea I've been working on?" Most people didn't even let him finish. Some politely shook their heads. Others ignored him completely. A few looked at his worn clothes and backpack and immediately assumed he was begging. But Daniel kept trying because he had nothing left to lose. One evening, just before sunset, Daniel stepped into a small coffee shop near the business district. Inside, people sat quietly with laptops open, typing and scrolling through screens. This time, Daniel approached a young man sitting alone in the corner. "Sorry to bother you," Daniel said, placing his notebook on the table. "I have an idea for an app that could help restaurants sell leftover food instead of throwing it away." The man glanced at the notebook, then at Daniel. His eyes slowly moved from Daniel's tired face to his worn jacket. Then he leaned back in his chair. "You're serious?" the man asked. Daniel nodded. "I've been working on the idea for weeks." The man flipped through a few pages of rough sketches. For a moment, Daniel felt a small spark of hope. But then the man suddenly chuckled. "Look, man," he said, pushing the notebook back across the table. "Even if this idea was good, you'd need money, investors, developers, marketing." He paused and glanced at Daniel's backpack again. "And honestly, you don't look like someone who has any of that." The words hit like a punch. A few people nearby had started listening. Daniel slowly picked up his notebook, trying to ignore the heat rising in his chest. As he turned to leave, the man added one last sentence. "You should probably focus on finding a job first." The quiet laughter from a nearby table followed Daniel as he walked out of the cafe. Outside, the evening air felt colder than before. For a moment, Daniel stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the passing cars. Maybe they were right. Maybe the idea was too big. Maybe someone like him had no chance of building something like this. But then Daniel remembered something. Every great company, every big success story started with someone who believed in an idea when no one else did. He tightened his grip on the notebook. If no one believed in him yet, then he would simply have to keep going until someone finally did. Daniel almost didn't go back to the library the next day. The laughter from the cafe the night before still echoed in his mind. For a moment, he considered giving up. Maybe everyone else was right. Maybe the idea was too big for someone like him. But deep down, Daniel knew one thing. If he gave up now, everything he had endured on the streets would mean nothing. So the next morning, he returned to the public library and sat at the same computer he had been using for weeks. He opened his notebook and began reviewing his sketches again. Feature lists, rough designs, notes about how restaurants could upload leftover meals before closing. Daniel was so focused that he didn't notice someone standing a few feet behind him. "Is that your idea?" The voice startled him. Daniel turned around to see a young woman holding a laptop bag over her shoulder. She had been looking over at the screen and the notebook in his hands. "Yeah," Daniel said, cautiously. "It's just something I've been working on." She stepped closer and glanced through the pages. A platform for restaurants to sell leftover food at a discount, so people nearby can buy it instead of letting it go to waste. Daniel nodded. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Daniel braced himself for the same reaction he had gotten everywhere else. A laugh, a sarcastic comment, another rejection. But instead, the woman looked back at him with a different expression. "Wait," she said quietly. "This might actually work." Daniel blinked, unsure if he heard her correctly. "What do you mean?" She pointed to one of the pages in Daniel's notebook. "Food waste is a massive problem. Restaurants lose money throwing food away every day. If there was an easy way to connect them with nearby customers." She paused. "People would definitely use this." For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something he almost forgot existed. Someone believed him. "My name is Emily," the woman said, extending her hand. Daniel hesitated for a moment before shaking it. "I'm Daniel." Emily sat down at the computer beside him and opened her laptop. "I'm studying software development, and honestly, your idea is better than half the startup projects people try to build." Daniel could hardly believe what he was hearing. "But building an app takes time, and it's not easy." Daniel nodded. "I know." She looked at the sketches one more time. Then she said the sentence that would change everything. "If you're serious about this, I can help you build the first version." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. Just days ago, everyone had treated him like a man who had already lost. But now, sitting inside a quiet corner of a public library, for the first time since becoming homeless, Daniel Carter finally had a partner. And together, they were about to turn a simple idea into something much bigger than either of them expected. For the next several weeks, Daniel and Emily worked harder than either of them had ever worked before. Every morning, they met at the same corner of the public library. Emily focused on building the first version of the app, typing lines of code for hours, while Daniel sat beside her, reviewing ideas and writing down new features in his notebook. The first version was far from perfect. The design was simple, the system barely worked, but it was real. For the first time, Daniel could actually open the app and see the concept he had imagined slowly coming to life. Now came the hardest part, convincing restaurants to use it. Day after day, Daniel walked from one restaurant to another, explaining the idea. Instead of throwing food away, he would say, You can sell it at a discount through the app before closing. Most owners barely listened. Some waved him away before he could finish. Others told him they didn't trust an unknown platform created by strangers. After nearly 2 weeks of rejection, Daniel and Emily were running out of hope. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Daniel stepped into a small family-owned cafe just a few blocks from the library. The owner, an older man wiping down the counter, listened quietly as Daniel explained the idea once again. Unlike the others, he didn't interrupt. When Daniel finished, the man looked at him thoughtfully. "You're telling me I can sell the food I usually throw away at the end of the day?" Daniel nodded. "And customers can see it through the app?" "Yes." The owner shrugged. "Well, I'm throwing it away anyway," he said. "Let's try it tonight." That single decision changed everything. Emily quickly uploaded the cafe's leftover sandwiches and pastries onto the app. For the first hour, nothing happened. Then suddenly, the first notification appeared. Someone nearby had placed an order, then another and another. Within 30 minutes, every single leftover item in the cafe was sold. The owner stared at the screen in disbelief. "I usually throw all of this away," he said. But that was only the beginning. A customer who bought one of the discounted meals posted about the app online later that night. By the next morning, dozens of people had downloaded it. Within a week, more restaurants started asking how they could join. Within a month, the small experiment Daniel started from a public library had turned into something far bigger than anyone expected. The app was spreading across the city. And for the first time since losing everything, Daniel Carter could finally see the future he had once only imagined. But what he didn't realize yet was that his biggest moment was still waiting for him. 3 years later, the city looked the same. The same busy streets, the same cafes filled with people rushing through their day. But Daniel Carter's life had changed in ways no one could have imagined. What started as a small idea inside a public library had grown into one of the fastest-growing food-saving platforms in the country. Thousands of restaurants were now using the app. Millions of meals that once would have been thrown away were being sold instead. Investors had stepped in, the company expanded to new cities, and somewhere along that journey, Daniel Carter officially became a self-made millionaire. But success wasn't the thing that mattered most to him. One afternoon, Daniel walked into a familiar neighborhood cafe, not as a homeless man this time, but as the founder of a successful company. The cafe looked almost exactly the same as it had years ago. The same tables, the same counter, and standing near the register was someone Daniel hadn't forgotten. Mark, his former coworker, the man who once laughed at him in front of an entire cafe. Mark was scrolling through his phone when he suddenly looked up. For a second, he frowned. Then his eyes widened in recognition. "Daniel?" he said, clearly surprised. Daniel simply nodded. Mark looked him over, confused. "You look different," he said awkwardly. "I heard something about a startup, something with food apps." Daniel gave a small smile. "Yeah," he replied calmly. "That was the idea I told people about a few years ago." Mark didn't laugh this time. Instead, he looked uncomfortable. "Wait, that was you?" he asked. Daniel nodded again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mark shook his head slowly. "I guess I was wrong about you." Daniel paused for a second before answering. "I wasn't trying to prove you wrong," he said quietly. "I just refused to believe my life was over." Mark had no response. As Daniel turned to leave the cafe, sunlight poured through the windows onto the busy street outside. 3 years earlier, he had walked those same streets with nothing but a backpack and an idea. People ignored him. Some laughed at him. Others believed he had already failed. But Daniel Carter had proven something that day. Sometimes the biggest comebacks in life begin when the whole world thinks you've already lost. And that's the story of Daniel Carter, a man who once slept on cold sidewalks with nothing but a backpack and a simple idea. People ignored him. Some laughed at him. Others believed his life was already over. But Daniel proved something powerful. Your lowest moment doesn't define your future. Sometimes, the moment when everything falls apart is actually the moment when everything begins. So if you're going through a difficult time right now, remember this: the world may doubt you. People may underestimate you. But your story isn't finished yet. And who knows, one day, you might be the one proving them wrong. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about resilience, comeback, and success. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.